Hello everyone, today I want to take you back to one of the most dramatic but often overlooked chapters of American history, the days when World War II literally washed up on the shores of St. Simon's Island, Georgia. Let's start at the beginning. World War II erupted in September 1939 when Nazi Germany led by Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. Hitler had spent years rebuilding Germany's military, swallowing up Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia, and forming dangerous alliances. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but for more than 2 years, the United States stayed officially neutral. We sent supplies and aid to Britain and the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program, but most Americans hope to stay out of another European war. Everything changed on December 7, 1941, when Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan and soon afterward on Germany and Italy. America was now fully committed to fighting the Axis powers across two oceans. By early 1942, German U-boats, submarines, began a ruthless campaign called Operation Drumbeat. Their goal was simple but devastating: sink as many American supply ships as possible before the United States could fully gear up for war. These submarines operated right off our east coast in shallow waters where they could hide easily. The U.S. coastline was almost completely unprotected at first. No convoys, weak air patrols, and cities that kept their lights blazing at night. Ships were silhouetted against the glow of shore towns like sitting ducks. That's exactly why St. Simon's Island became part of this story. This beautiful barrier island sits along one of the most important shipping lanes on the East Coast. Tankers loaded with oil from the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean passed right by here on their way north to refineries and ports. The island already had a Coast Guard station built in 1936, and nearby Brunswick had active shipyards. Its location made it both a target and natural defensive outpost. The calm waters, the existing infrastructure, and the proximity to vital sea routes turned this peaceful resort island into a frontline home front community almost overnight. Now let me paint the picture of the night that brought the war directly to St. Simon's. It was April 8th, 1942, just 4 months after Pearl Harbor. The evening was clear. Shore lights were still shining brightly because full blackout rules hadn't been enforced yet. The German submarine U-123, commanded by the aggressive Captain Reinhard Hodegen, slipped into position just a few miles offshore. The first victim was the tanker SS Oklahoma. A torpedo slammed into her side. The explosion lit up the sky. Within minutes, the ship was burning and sinking. Less than an hour later, the same U-boat struck again. This time, the SO Baton Rouge, another massive fireball. The next morning, the same submarine sank the SS Esparta a little further south near Cumberland Island. In total, 22 or 23 merchant mariners lost their lives that night. Many others were burnt, injured, or struggling in the oil-covered water. Local Coast Guard crews from the St. Simon station raced out in their boats to pull survivors from the sea. They brought the shaken men back to the station, gave them medical care, warm clothes, and hot meals. For the people living on St. Simons, it was a terrifying wake-up call. Rumors flew. People whispered about German spies landing on the beaches or U-boats surfacing at night. The war had arrived on American soil. Those attacks forced quick changes. The Navy and Coast Guard immediately strengthened patrols. Civilian volunteers and soldiers manned newly built wooden lookout towers on the beaches and near the causeway, scanning the horizon day and night for periscopes or suspicious activity. From Naval Air Station Glencoe, just across the Sound, giant blimps, massive helium-filled airships, took off on anti-submarine patrol. These slow-moving but highly effective blimps could stay aloft for hours, spotting U-boats from the air and guiding destroyers to them. After the April attacks, the U-boats largely abandoned the Georgia coast, thanks to the new convoy system and increased air cover. Another important role to St. Simons played was training. The Navy took over McKinnon Airport and turned it into Naval Air Station St. Simons. They even requisitioned the elegant King and Prince Hotel to house officers. Here, the Navy ran a radar training school. Radar was brand new technology in 1942, secret and cutting edge. Young officers learned how to use it to detect enemy aircraft, track ships, and direct fighter planes. These skills would prove vital later in the war in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. So while bombs weren't falling on St. Simons, the island was quietly helping America master the technology that helped win the war. Meanwhile, just across the water in Brunswick, shipyards worked around the clock building Liberty ships, those sturdy, mass-produced cargo vessels that carried troops, tanks, and supplies to Europe and the Pacific. Local families planted victory gardens, collected scrap metal, bought war bonds, and lived with rationing books for sugar, gasoline, and tires. The home front on St. Simons was fully mobilized. If you want to experience this history firsthand, you absolutely must visit the World War II Home Front Museum right on the island. It's located inside the historic St. Simons Coast Guard Station on the East Beach, the exact same building that served as the rescue headquarters during those 1942 attacks. The station, built in 1936, is a beautiful example of public works and administration architecture and is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Inside the museum, you step back in time. Exhibits let you relive the night of April 8th. You can listen to first-hand accounts through old-style telephones, study a giant map showing exactly where the ships were torpedoed, and see artifacts from that era. There are interactive displays about the blimps and radar school and Liberty ship construction. You'll learn about rationing, plane spotting, and the everyday sacrifices made by families here on the coast. The museum does a wonderful job of showing how a small southern island community played a real part in protecting America and supporting the larger war effort. The museum is run by the Coastal Georgia Historical Society and is part of the statewide Georgia World War II Heritage Trail. It's a thoughtful, engaging place that focuses on the human stories rather than just the battles and dates. Whether you're a history buff visiting with family, or just curious about how World War II touched every corner of America, this museum delivers. So that's the story of St. Simon's Island during World War II. It wasn't the site of a famous landing or a major battle, but it was exactly the kind of place where the home front became the front line in the dark days of 1942, when America was still reeling from Pearl Harbor. Ordinary people here, Coast Guardsmen, radar trainees, shipyard workers, volunteers in lookout towers, and everyday residents helped turn the tide against the U-boats and build the strength that would eventually lead to victory. Next time you walk along the quiet beaches of St. Simon's or watch the lighthouse beam sweep across the water at night, remember that 84 years ago, those same waters were lit up by burning tankers and determined response of a nation at war. The island's World War II history reminds us that sometimes the most important contributions happen not on distant battlefields, but right here in our own backyards. Thank you for listening. I hope this brings the story to life for you. Until next time, knowledge is power.
Can I let it die down? I remember days in the trench. Time to go hard in, time to go all in, time to get my all to this shit. Panamera maxed out, first class flights out Atlantic to Pacific, yeah, it's lit.